Hello and welcome to Worst Quality Crab, a podcast of Asian American recipes and stories from best quality hearts. I'm your host, Freesia Lee. Thank you so much for being here for this very special first episode. If you are curious about why we started this podcast and its name, there is a special little intro episode that you can go listen to. It's very short. But quickly, I'll say that my goal with this podcast is really just to build connection and community to other Asian Americans and to do it through food and through stories, both of which I think are so important to Asian culture. The title is a reference to the film The Joy Luck Club, which was essentially the Asian American film of my adolescence before Disney's Mulan came along. And the film is essentially a look into the lives and the perspectives of Chinese mothers and daughters, and a lot of times food is involved, and that is exactly what we're going to do on this show. So if you know, you know, and if you don't, go listen to the intro episode, or better yet, go watch The Joy Luck Club, or even read the book. Anyway, I am so excited to be kicking this off. Joining me today are my guests, Margot Seeto, Bay Area food and travel writer and author of The Dumpling Report. And with her is Worst Quality Crab producer, who also sometimes helps out with The Dumpling Report, Samson Lee, and who happens to be my husband. Margot, Sam, welcome. I'm so happy to have you both here.
Thanks.
Hello, happy to be here. I'm so excited.
Same here.
Yay.
Also, my baby is a guest as well, so if you may hear her.
She is welcome. She's your number one dumpling.
She is number one dumpling.
So this being the first episode and you both being sort of the beginning of the journey, both currently and way back when this transpired, let's talk a little bit about how we got here. Margot, you were actually the inspiration for this podcast.
Oh, thank you.
Did you know that?
Was it from when I wrote that comfort food essay during 2020?
Mm-hmm. It was that.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, obviously you had this idea already brewing in your head, but I feel like maybe that just like lit the fire.
No, that actually, your essay about what comfort food meant to you and whether or not you really had what you felt was like a family history of food really sparked this idea. And I just got thinking about like, what are the recipes that are almost so ubiquitous to our family that we don't think about it, but those are the ones that we miss the most? What are those like for other people? What about people that sort of grew up in a different Asian American experience, maybe adoptees or fifth generation or mixed and fifth generation in my case? And what was that like? And like thinking about how fun it would be to start to curate those stories and the recipes so that we can actually cook them. And then as this was brewing in my head, I thought I would reach out to both of you and just say like, hey, write me a piece, pick a recipe. And part of what I was looking for was the idea of so much in the Asian American community that happens at home sort of stays at home and is quiet, and we don't necessarily talk about amongst our friends and peers, especially when we're kids. And then the flip of that being that like there is, you know, Asian Americans are not a monolith and everything is so different. But what was funny to me is that I asked you both for recipes. You picked the same dish. Just, I mean, could not prove the point more that it was the same dish, two completely different stories. And I love it. And it just sort of kept me going and kept this idea brewing for years. And here we are.
It's really funny to me because growing up when I had the dish, it just didn't occur to me that anyone else would eat this similar thing.
Yes.
Except for inside my family.
Because it's not like, oh, this is a Chinese dish. It's just like, oh, my parent made this up.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And then it was the same thing.
Exactly the point. I love it. Oh my God. Okay. So let's talk about the dish. Let's just jump right in. Sam, you describe, Margot, you chime in, and then I just want to hear the stories and how, you know, I kind of know them a little bit, but in your words, like, Sam, what was it like for you eating it? What did it mean? You know, Margot, I think we've got some funny histories on the name of it on your side. So somebody tell me about this dish.
So the dish is very basic. I think in Cantonese it's called Ching Dao Ngao Yok Fan. And it's just basically green peas, minced beef, And if you're feeling really fancy, you could like mix a little egg in there at the end. And it was just a dish that my mom would make us when she didn't feel like cooking a whole dinner. And this would be usually on Fridays when my dad was working late. He worked at a printing factory back in the day, like printing local newspapers for various communities in Queens and all over New York. And if he was working late, that meant my mom didn't necessarily have to like go full out with a full, banquet style meal like every other weekday. And like she could just kind of chill out and relax and make sure me and my sister were fed. And like, whatever time my dad would come home, like he would just, they would figure it out later, like, something else to eat.
Samson, so your mom made banquet style meals like every day?
Practically, like,
Wow.
Growing up, there was definitely like a stir-fried vegetable, 2 or 3 proteins, and then maybe a side vegetable too, and like a soup that she would make every night.
Mm-hmm.
A different soup every day?
Maybe it would last like 2 nights, like a melon soup or something like that, and rice, of course.
Having married into this, I can attest to all of that.
I was like, that
It is
sounds
real.
amazing.
I am not
Lucky.
that wife.
You're like, that's a high bar. That is a high bar. That's funny that you say that like this dish was your mom's like turn it down, be casual dish, because for my family that was my dad was the main cook and that was like a normal dish for us. It's a very standard.
No, I definitely saw it as a treat. Like it's day before the weekend, treat going into the weekend. Fun, different dinner. Like, oh yeah, that was the other thing. Like my mom would make this like go through banquet style dinners every weekday, basically weekday night. And as awesome as that sounds, you just want a break from that just because it becomes commonplace. I hate to say it, but
Yeah.
it's just something different. And this dish would be this kind of special thing that was out of the ordinary.
That makes sense.
Margot, what was it like for you?
So stepping back to the comfort food recipe essay that I had written, it was during 2020, we were all doing shelter in place. Everyone's cooking at home if they could, or kind of had to. And so, a lot of people fell back into like comfort food and like recipes they had growing up because it was like, oh, this is stressful. What reminds me of home? And I was like, man, I don't have any of these things, or I thought I didn't. No recipe book. My mom doesn't cook. My dad's cooking is like extremely like it's a microwave based, very casual. And so I was like, dang. And then when I thought about more and more, then I was like, oh, I do have these dishes. In my mind, they just weren't elevated to like status of family recipe because it was so normalized and so casual. And so that's when I had this epiphany that that's what they were. And this ground beef dish was one of them. And the name of it in our family. Which is not normal. My dad doesn't usually name stuff, but he called it peas a la Seeto. Our last name is Seeto. And so I asked him about it more, and he just like made it up on the fly because it was my little brother really liked the dish. So he asked, he's like, what is this called? And my dad was like, I don't know. Sure. Peas a la Seeto. So it became a thing. So yeah, it's like usually frozen ground beef, bought in bulk, frozen peas, like chopped onions. Sometimes it's like the dehydrated chopped onions from Costco. Like black pepper, garlic powder, usually like a cornstarch slurry with some soy sauce. And then I was writing him an email about it, and he did say, oh, maybe sometimes I'd fancy it up with some eggs. So as you mentioned, Sam, I don't honestly remember the egg part, but I was like, whoa, he just brought that up too. And all cooked in the microwave in his stages. I think it was like ground beef and onions first, then you put in the peas and all the other stuff. And then we would have it usually with rice, but sometimes it'd be like pasta or just whatever carb was around.
Wait a second. Did you say you cooked this all in the microwave?
Yep. He's all about efficiency because I have 3 siblings. So, cooking for 6 people is a lot. So he would just do this, not this specific dish, but he would usually make something like a huge casserole-esque thing on Sundays that we would just eat like the whole week. And he was going to actually write a microwave cookbook. This when he was younger. I asked him about it recently. He was like, no, I'm too tired.
Maybe we should get your dad on.
I know. I'm like, but it was nice because it sparked an email thread between my siblings and me and my dad. And so it was like us all sort of putting the pieces together as to like, oh wait, what else was in the dish and all these. So that was pretty cool.
Do you find, like, thinking about that thread, that your siblings remember the experience of it differently than you do?
I think so. So the most active people in the thread are my little brother and me and my dad, which makes sense because I think it's clear that at this point, that dish meant the most to him. And he's the one who asked what the name of it was. And he added, I didn't know, that when he was in college, he actually tried to make it the dish a few times. But he was like, he pan fried it. And then I think one time he had tomato sauce, but he added too much. So then it was like soup or something like that. And so I was like, wow, this dish really like means way more to him than it does to me. And I didn't realize that.
Why did you pick it?
I think because it was the one that actually had a name. Like none of the other ones had names, but I realized they're all cooked kind of the same way. Like my dad has the same base for all these types of microwavy dishes with frozen veg in them and the cornstarch slurry to make it kind of Chinesey, I suppose. That's Samson, did your mom did she do a slurry as well with this dish, or was it a little more healthier?
I think there was kind of a slurry. That's kind of where the egg would come in too. She kind of like is like a little bit of a slurry and then like mix the egg in at around the same time. This was like not in the microwave, but just in a regular wok. And also definitely when I was in college or just living on my own right after college, I did make this dish for myself a few times. Just because it was relatively easy to make.
How did it measure up to your mom's?
Did not measure up. I think it's just maybe nostalgia, but like every time I cook it now, it just doesn't feel like I nail it. I'm not sure what it is, and I don't really have time to like perfect it.
Interesting. Have you talked to your mom about it lately?
I haven't actually. It's all just been kind of internal in my head and like writing it out a little bit. I talked to my sister about it too, just to see if she remembered it, and she did remember it.
Was it also one of her favorites?
I don't know if it was necessarily her favorite. Growing up, I got the impression she was a lot pickier of an eater than I was, but I think it was something that she would eat. And like she wasn't always a fan of whatever was being cooked all the other days of the week. So I think she must have liked it.
Yeah, it seems like a very kid-friendly dish.
He makes it for our kids sometimes.
That's awesome. And are they like, yay?
They're kind of hit or miss. They're kind of weird. Like if they take a few bites, they'll be like, oh yeah, okay, I like it. But then if I like mention it to them, like, hey, do you want this dish? And they'll be like, ew, no, like, no, I don't want that.
Burn.
Well, also, we have no nostalgia. Like, we haven't created any situation in which it's special for them. It's just like us cooking any other night. And so we haven't set them up for like, this is with movie night, or this is when mommy's away and daddy is doing the thing or whatever. Not that mommy does most of the cooking.
Yeah, that's true. They're like, what is this new random thing you're making?
Why do you like it so much, and why am I supposed to like it?
Yeah.
I can't help but notice that there is a stark difference in who did the cooking in both of your families. Sam's mom always cooked, and Margot, your dad, always does the cooking. What was that like for both of you as kids to see that? And I guess, like, how does that show up in who you are as adults?
So my dad has always been a very opinionated person about food. Like, even though my mom would just like cook her butt off every night, like he had little like criticisms of, things that were like, oh, this is overcooked, or this is too salty, or this is not salty enough, or something like that. So growing up, I knew my dad like worked at a restaurant before, like when I was either before I was born or when I was way younger. And like for some reason, when I was little, I got it into my head that like he was a master chef or something like that, or he worked as a chef.
Wait, I never knew any of this. Okay. It's fascinating.
It was just in my head. because he was so opinionated about food. So I was like, oh, he must be some sort of an authority about food, and that's why he has all these opinions. But as I grew up, I came to learn that like he was more of like just a waiter or like a helper in the restaurant where his brother worked. It was like a first job when he first immigrated here type of situation. And so like in the back of my head growing up, I was like, oh, he knows so much about food, but he never really cooks. So I don't know what's going on there. Yeah, my mom did most of the cooking, and that just seemed like default American style growing up.
Yeah.
It was a thing that was most similar to American culture to me when I was growing up. It was like the mom does all the domestic stuff, and the dad's very judgmental.
Oh God.
I mean, that is very like 50s, not that you grew up in the 50s, but right, that archetypal. I think it's, pretty common. I think that like you had the more like normal experience, I guess, in terms of like, domestic roles.
Yeah, for sure.
Can we say systemic patriarchal experience?
Yes.
Yep.
Well, yeah, and how does that translate to now? Well, yeah, wait, and you do the cooking, Sam, right? More than Frisia does?
We're 50-50. Let's credit where credit. No, he probably does. I mean, this is why I'm curious, right? Because like as your partner who is on the receiving end of your cooking, like you grew up in a household where your dad did zero of it to this day. And you have kind of taken up the mantle on a lot of meals and seem to really enjoy it.
Yeah, I mean, there was a certain point in my childhood where like I was a latchkey kid too, so my mom would be working outside of the house and my dad would be working outside of the house. And then so as a means of survival or like just eating a thing that I liked eating, like I would have to cook it myself when I was home alone. So like I just got used to cooking and making stuff for myself. And then, making it for the rest of my family now, you guys, like it's just more portions is basically it. So it's like sort of natural for me, I feel like.
And Margot, your dad did all the cooking for you and three brothers.
Yeah, for the most part. So the caveat to that is that we also had, when we had these like Chinese grandmother like babysitters during the weekdays. So my dad would make this big whole thing on Sundays usually. We would eat it throughout the week, but we also had this Chinese babysitter food. So he wasn't cooking like every night because both my parents were super busy. Would I characterize both of them as workaholics? They were always just like very busy, like both working full time, both really involved, like in community organizations. So I feel like they were always at meetings or like dinners or something. Oh, right. So the cooking thing. So my mom worked in a Chinese restaurant when she was a teenager. And so she cites that reason as to why she doesn't cook ever again after that. Yeah, she said she was a waitress, but she was so sick of the whole thing that she just didn't want to cook. I really only have memories of her cooking like maybe twice. And one of them, although I was like, she can cook, she just never did. It's not like she was a bad cook. So the thing that I remember her making is like, that the Chinese steamed fish, it may have been catfish, with like ginger and scallions in the steamer. And then I was talking to my brothers about it, and one of them he was like, oh, I remember, this is also what I remember. And I was like, okay, are we remembering the same memory, like the exact time that she did it, or did she do it more than once?
Like she did it one time and everyone just latched onto that one time.
It'd be funnier if it was just like the once, right? I'm like, oh, because it was so significant, like so different. You're like, oh, you're cooking. Okay, and it was good. Your follow-up question about how does that manifest today? In theory, I really like to cook, but my partner is a much better cook, like naturally, and more instinctual. Also, he's a vegetarian. And then also, since having the baby, like, I just have not been cooking really that much at all. Just, tired and time. So he really does, he's been cooking dinner, like, pretty much every day. So I'm like, oh, is part of this because of the way I grew up with my dad cooking?
Well, I mean, I think it's interesting what you just named too, right? Because your mom had 4 kids, and so there's there maybe came a point where she was just like, I'm very tired of having all of these children on me. Speaking from experience, I don't want to cook anymore. And then so your dad just sort of took that up and leaned into his microwave cooking, and that stuck.
He was in the Army Reserve for maybe 6 years. I don't remember. But so he got used to cooking, like, for kitchen patrol style, just like en masse for a ton of people, like really efficiently. So, having 4 kids, I think that was like, that translated very well, that skill set.
But I'd imagine, right, like when you're cooking in the Army Reserve and you're cooking in mass, like you're not concerned about like chopping all of the onions super perfectly and having like consistent textures and making sure that everything is like exactly the texture and temperature and like cook that you want it to be, because you're cooking for 100 people.
Mm-hmm. No, that's totally true. When you said like not diced perfectly, I was like, oh my God, that's exactly true. Like my dad, when he like cuts onions, he uses like the tiniest paring knife on like a plate, and his chunks of onions are so big. And all of my brothers and I are always like, what is this? So yes, spot on.
In thinking about this beef dish and how you show up in the kitchen, how you feel about cooking and food, and both being parents, what do you think it might be like for your kids? Margot, I'm going to ask you first because you have the new one. Cooking for them, like their relationship to your food, not necessarily this dish specifically, but.
Mm-hmm. Oh, it's interesting you're asking me first. I think because my baby has no teeth yet. And so, just has been just in the beginning stages of feeding her food. Mm-hmm. But of course, like even when I was pregnant, I still have these food fantasies, right? Of things that I want to make for her or share with her. When she's a little bit older, it's like, oh, we're going to have waffles on the weekends because I have like 2 waffle irons, or like, oh, my partner doesn't like eggs, he doesn't eat meat, so what are all the eggy meaty things that I can like foist onto her and I can have like an eating partner. Mm-hmm. This is like what I hope. She could be a vegetarian, she could be a vegan, but I figure when she's little and maybe may not have a choice, I'm gonna just make her try everything. And then I had that thought too. I was like, oh God, like I still want her to appreciate like Chinese food, Asian food, and I was like, well, I don't know how to cook everything, but I would like her to have her grow up with those flavors as well. So what can I do? And only recently, in talking about this podcast, I was like, oh, maybe I should make peas a la Seeto for her at some point. So those are my hopes and my dreams. I don't know if you two had those thoughts too, and how that has manifested or may not have manifested with your kids.
I really like the idea of like molding a food buddy so you can enjoy meals together. But I didn't realize this until much later in life, I guess. The concept of making a large meal and eating it throughout the week, or making a large casserole or something like that, didn't come to me until much later than in life than, I don't know.
Till we got married?
Expect. I think so. I think because my mom would make dinner every night, and we'd have some leftovers, but there'd be definitely at least one new thing every night. And I realized like that was because my dad hated leftovers. So there had to be there had to be a new thing every night. And then like I guess that translated into me not really being used to having leftovers, or like seeing my mom like force herself trying to finish the leftovers just because like no one else would be very interested in eating leftovers either.
This is how I feel in our house, honestly, because our kids don't really like leftovers either, and I grew up on leftovers. Mm-hmm. And so now I feel like when we have leftovers, because I will be the one that makes the bigger thing, like I make the cheesy pasta casserole or whatever, and I'm like, okay, you guys eat chicken tenders, mama's gonna work on these leftovers.
Also, as parents, there's also a weird what do you call it, like accomplishment or gratification you feel when a child like ends up finishing the whole dish or something, or like they're really into it, they really want to eat it, and they eat it all up, and there's nothing left, there's no leftovers. I think to my mom that meant like what she made was awesome, and she didn't have to heat up or eat leftovers the next night, and also like everyone was happy with what she made.
Oh God, I just realized how much sense of validation we take from either how our food is received or not, or like what else we're placing on how much someone eats of something, right? And like I guess this goes exactly back to like why this podcast is called Worst Quality Crab, and we think about the mom and she's like, here's my crab dish, it's not salty enough, right? Because she like wants everyone to love it, but she can't like come out and say it's her best dish. But having so much pinned on, will this be received? Will this be appreciated? Will people show me that by eating it all? Regardless of, in our kids' case, like how hungry they are, how tired they are, if they've just had a bunch of snacks because we did that to them. But still, and in your mom's case too, just like, you know, you were two kids and your dad was maybe tired or whatever, but so much riding on like, is this dish going to get finished? Will I have to eat it again tomorrow? Will I have to make something completely different from this because it wasn't that well received tonight or whatever?
Yeah, I mean, now there's definitely times where I've like made a plan where I'm going to make this great dish that everyone's going to like. I'm going to spend all this time making it and, you know, put it on the table, and the kids are like, not for me. And it's like, definitely feel a frustration of like, why did I spend all this time making this if you know, you guys are just going to eat a quesadilla or something.
Like a microwave quesadilla. Kind of, I guess related to that, I had an older coworker who at the time had teenage boys, like teenage boys, and she had made this comment, and that really kind of stayed with me because I was so surprised by it back then, but maybe less so now as I'm coming into parenthood. She was like, if you're not kind of a good cook, like your kids don't really love you. It's like, oh my God,
wow,
that is so harsh and extreme. I hope that's not standard, but I mean, what is your take on that comment?
Well, I have to ask, was she Asian?
She's Hapa. Yeah.
Okay.
She's part Asian.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like in the Asian community, and also part of why this podcast exists, right? Like so much of love and appreciation is shown through food because we are not historically good at sharing our emotions through words. So there is a sense of like, if I'm not a good cook, I don't know how to show you my love. Or if it's not good, I have to eat it anyway in order to show you my love. Like it's reciprocal that way. Which I don't think is healthy. And like, we're not trying to be those parents, but I do understand how that exists and how that like mentality is there. And we will actively work to be breaking that down. But I get it, right? And like, I think there are so many people our age, and I have clients who have struggled with disordered eating and just like very complicated feelings around food, because so much of how people show love, and like this is true in my family too, is like, I'm going to cook something for you and it's going to be elaborate and it's going to be over the top, whether or not that's the thing that you want. And also maybe I'm going to criticize your body at the same time. And so like, that's super complicated also. But there's so much that goes into like, in our family especially, all of our events are like, let's have a big elaborate meal, whether or not anyone wants it.
My parents visit us and the baby every other week, and most of the time like they bring over some kind of food, and it's not like, oh, we cooked this thing for you, but it's like, oh, we went to Costco, like here's a gigantic jar of nuts. Or like, it was like 2 for $5 Friday at Safeway. Here's like a 2-pound tub of potato salad.
No one at home can see this, but I am nodding profusely because I understand this.
I know, and most of the time I'm like, yeah, sweet. Or sometimes I'll be like, I don't like snack on nuts with things anyway. And then just like contrast to my boyfriend who didn't grow up like that, and so for him it's like, oh, this is clutter, like this is just so much stuff, this is excess. And I'll get mad because I'll be like, this is how they show they care, and this is normal. And if you're Asian or a lot of different cultures. And so it's funny you just brought that up now, because I was like, oh, this is like a recent conversation.
Yes. In my family, every time we've had a baby, people are like, oh, it's so great your family's close by. They come and help and they can visit the baby. But what really happens is they bring us takeout, which is great.
Nice.
I will not say no to takeout, right? But this idea of like families close by to help out does not exist in our family.
Oh, yeah.
They will bring us takeout.
Yeah.
They will make us meals. They will come over and eat with us. And that's it. And it's part of how they show love. It's part of like it's their act of service to feed us. But like one person in my family has changed a diaper. One. Outside of like the family that lives in these four walls.
My turn to nod profusely.
Mm-hmm. My grandma will always talk about like they used to have these taco parties, and how they hosted and entertained was centered around food. And my late grandfather, like his older sister raised him, and the way she showed love to her kids, her nephews, all through food, and everything was just carrying through food. So now here we are many, many years later, and I find myself being like, I got you this special ice cream that you like. And the kids are like, whatever. And I'm like, oh, wait, okay. I'm doing the thing of like trying to show love through food and feeling rejected because like they're not hungry right now, or they're just not into this thing that they were into 6 months ago. And so it's having to rewire and reprogram for myself so that we are also not passing on this generational thing of like, we show love through food, also have very complicated feelings about it. Like,
I think food is definitely a valid and common expression of love. But when it becomes like the only way you can express your love, like you really kind of like flatten that experience into this one thing, and you put a lot of, I guess, weight onto it, and it could be very crushing if it doesn't land the way you want it to. So I think, growing up in that sort of, like, just seeing that, I want to, as a parent, try to, like, be able to express my love in, multiple ways and have it be, like, a three-dimensional thing instead of just this one thing. Although food is super, super important.
Sam, how do you think your mom feels now that she doesn't cook nearly as much?
She has to still cook for him pretty much every night. I'm pretty sure she's like been tired of doing that for at least 20 years now. I think that's kind of like the only life she knows, and she kind of just deals with it.
Mm-hmm. It sounds like for her, she actually doesn't have these complicated expression of love through food things that my family does, but maybe sense of validation through food. But also she was cooking a lot more when, like, your sister still lived closer and all of those things. And so now she's just been cooking for the two of them for so long. Like, do you think that that's changed for her somehow, or?
I want to say it's like a relief to her just to not have to, manage all these different dishes and like be responsible for putting this meal together every night. I think it's probably a major relief.
Do they ever do takeout, or is your dad like, no?
They will do occasional takeout, but it's always like very Asian, Vietnamese food, not really straying too far from like Canto stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Or Patricia and I were both nodding.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because we've been together 17 years, something like that.
Oh my gosh.
And in those 17 years that I've been to Sam's house and visited his parents, which granted pandemic and kids, it hasn't been as much, but in that time I've had takeout at their house one time, and it was Vietnamese, and it was after a 3-hour car trip from New Jersey to Brooklyn.
Wow.
For those not familiar, it shouldn't take that long. For those
Yeah, it takes a
familiar,
long time.
pick your jaw up off the floor. Yes. And it was basically a concession because we had been in the car so long and it was so late and everyone was so tired.
Yeah, takeout was super uncommon for my family growing up. I think the closest thing we got to takeout was like if my parents went to Chinatown, they would get like some roast pork sliced up or, you know, a soy sauce chicken or something like that. And my mom wouldn't have to cook a whole chicken that night. Anything like ordering a pizza or even ordering Chinese food, like that was like kind of very uncommon until I was like a teenager or something like that.
Growing up, like after, like my mom would pick us up from school, often like this is, you know, when we had aged out of having babysitters. And so we would just swing by like one of those Cantonese steam tray places and she'd pick up a few things and we just have that. Or like now my dad does that. But as far as like what they like to eat, it took me a few years to like piece this together or realize it. Because, you know, on the one hand, it's like, oh, we grew up in San Francisco, so diverse. Like we have access to all kinds of stuff. So everyone grows up eating like burritos and Chinese food and, you know, blah, blah, blah. But I realized that my parents, well, mostly my dad, when he goes out to eat, he really likes to go to like these semi-hole-in-the-wall Cantonese places where you can get like, it's like almost like fixed price, you know, like, oh, three dishes for like $30 or $20. And then if anything beyond that, they'll just be like, oh my God, this is expensive. So like even, I don't think he likes Vietnamese. That's too far. It's too far. I think my brothers and I realized this. We're like, it's not like a cheap sort of semi-hole in the wall place that comes with soup and rice with no charge, you know, something like that. If it's not like very meaty, then my dad won't like it. So like, forget Japanese food. Like, I think, and then we were like, oh, this explains why. He's not going to want like, you know, a bowl of pho because it's probably not enough meat for him. Just like little bits and pieces. And so I think that made me realize, like, you know, I didn't have Vietnamese food until I was in high school and I was eating with my friends, which sounds shocking, you know, having grown up in San Francisco with it literally like, you know, almost down the street right there. So yeah,
I had the same experience. I didn't have Vietnamese until I was in high school either. And what's also funny is I feel like I had the exact opposite experience of Sam, and I was thinking about this as I was getting ready for this recording. No one in my family, as I was growing up, other than fried rice, nobody cooked anything Chinese. It was always takeout or we went to a restaurant. A product of being, you know, fourth, fifth-ish generation Chinese American, they worked so hard to assimilate and just like really lean into that 50s era of microwave and canned goods and like American cheese slices on spaghetti and that sort of thing. Cream soups as sauces. That
my dad does that.
Yeah, right. Yeah. That's some choice like Chinese people using super American things to make them way better. But yeah, like to me, the idea of cooking Chinese food is super foreign in a lot of ways because I did not see that modeled for me in any way. And so then when Sam and I were dating and I would like go to his house and see his mom cook all this, I was like, wait, what? Like, this is a thing that a person can do every single night from their home? Like it didn't make sense or like register to me at all. Because for us, it would just be like, oh, okay, well, let's either I would like be at my aunt's house and she would get the same takeout order every single time, which as a kid I loved because it had sweet and sour. Or we would get in the car and we would go like 6 minutes to also kind of hole in the wall, like same Chinese place or like one of two places. And like there was the standard order to the point where like in my late 20s, my grandfather was like, this is your favorite dish and that's your favorite dish and this is your favorite dish. Whether or not we still liked it, but from, you know, when everyone was like 10 or 20 years younger. But realizing just today that like I grew up with zero actual Chinese cooking in my family. So even when Sam cooks a little bit, I'm like, oh yeah, okay.
Fancy. Yeah, we don't have I didn't grow up with a wok. I don't have a wok.
Wow.
Sam, are you shocked?
Yeah, I didn't grow up with a wok either.
Oh my God. Yeah, it was always hilarious. Whenever your family, Frisia, would do like Chinese New Year or something like that.
Oh my God.
And it would be a big fuss about like, oh, we got to make egg foo young and we have to steam a fish. And
you're like, that Monday.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
In the back.
That's
In
the
the back
one
of my
time.
head, I'd be like, okay, those are like relatively simple things. Like, what's the big? Like, my mom
Yes.
could do that in like
Yes.
no time.
Oh, no, totally. Like Chinese New Year was the one time that I saw Chinese food cooked within our home. And it was a huge fucking deal. And it was like so elaborate, and it was not that big of it, like not complicated. Like egg foo young takes a long time, but is basically just a mixture of egg and like some things you have lying around in your fridge for those who don't know. And then like steaming a fish takes, I don't know, 10 minutes to prep and 10 minutes to steam. But like, whoa, the fish.
Before we started hosting stuff, I think in the back of my head, I was always like, I could do this if you guys want. You guys could just relax and I could just do this if you want. Because it didn't seem like that big of a deal to me.
Yeah. Well, and then we did start hosting it in part because of that. Like we kind of knew that we could do it as well or better and more simply. And like, I think my family also, again, like having been here for so long, and like my mom and her brother growing up in the 60s and like what it was like to be Chinese American in San Francisco in the 60s. And like, can't fathom. But they are even farther removed from Chinese food and Chinese cooking than I am because they didn't marry into it. And they sort of swung the other way on like assimilating to American/white culture, that it was like a big deal for them to do any of the things, and then maybe also not doing them like the best way or with like the most technique. And so we just started hosting, and Sam would do like a braised pork belly and mushrooms, which like takes some time to like it takes like some setup time, right? Like to soak the mushrooms and whatever. But they're easy dishes, and they would get super impressed.
Fancy.
They sound fancy. Yeah, totally. And like it was the same thing for me too. I was like, wait, you could make this? And then he did, and I was like, oh, right. None of this is hard. You just have to like learn it and be exposed to it, and then like want to do it.
Super common dish for me growing up.
Acquiring the pantry staples is, I think, the daunting part, because you're like, I don't have any of these things. How can a human possibly make these? And then you're like, oh, once you like get all this stuff, then you're set for a while.
But also just like in my mind, there was something, it still is to a degree, something about Chinese food where I'm just like, I can't do that. Like that is something a restaurant only can do.
Yeah.
Whereas like
sometimes I feel that way
I'll
too.
look at other types of cuisine and I'll be like, could I make that? Let me see. Right. And so there's a weird sort of like almost like how I feel about it gets in the way of like what I think I can learn about it and what I can like do on my own. And I guess to bring this back to parenting, like starting to think about how do we communicate food and different cultures and cuisines to our kids so that like one isn't either like fetishized or like sort of like made to feel more basic or unachievable or unattainable or things like that. Because for me, for sure, like growing up, half Chinese in San Francisco, but also never having Chinese food cooked to me, there's a weird sort of like Chinese food is only out, but also it shouldn't be expensive, and like, again, complicated feelings around it. And wanting to like work those out so that we don't sort of unnecessarily pass those on to our kids, and they can make up their own weird feelings about food, I guess.
Yes. No, that's all true. Also, I think because we're so lucky here that getting decent Chinese food, usually at a decent price, it's so easily accessible to us too. So it almost was like, well, I don't even need to bother. Like, why bother learning how? Because it's just right there.
Yeah, I definitely think that's how my grandparents and my parents grew up. My mom grew up. Because my grandma will tell stories about like when she moved here for college and she would take the bus and they're like, I used to get a rice bowl with like beef and egg and it was a quarter. She's like so proud of that. And then later she one time was like, she made it and she was like, I used to eat this all the time in college and it's really easy and da 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 da. And I was like, why haven't you been making this for the last 50 years? Like, this is delicious. It's so simple. It used to cost you a quarter. You've made this 2 times. I'm 25. Like, what are you, what's happening? But it's those things, right? Of like, in her case, particularly like not wanting to be the housewife that cooked because she worked forever and was like pretty high up in a lot of things, worked her way up, and just like wanting to kind of assimilate into American culture. And so rejecting the idea of like learning Chinese cooking. But anyway, back to your dishes. Beef and peas. How do you feel about them today?
I haven't made it myself. I don't think. I'm really trying to think, like, have I ever tried to make it, like, specifically? I don't think so. Yet is the question. So I think that's something I would like to do, I guess, relatively soon.
Would you do it in the microwave?
Oh, see, that's a good question. My first thought is no, but if I were to stay true to the new family recipe, then I would have to, and I know it would be easy. And the peas have to be frozen. They have to be frozen peas.
You bring up a really interesting point about like if you want to stay true to the recipe, you'd have to do it in the microwave.
Mm-hmm.
And like, at what point do you just decide I'm going to remake this recipe my own and have that be the new version? Because I think in my family, there's a lot of like, we always do this way. And like, they think that there's a lot of traditions that hang on these little things, but which aren't actually true. We don't really have traditions, but there's a lot of like, it has to be this way or it's not real or right or whatever.
I understand that.
Even if you get a better outcome.
I think because my family doesn't have those things, so it's like for example, if I was like, Dad, I'm gonna make this, he doesn't care like at all. So I don't feel that pressure to be like, oh, but if it's not exact, it's not tradition. But I used to think that way. It was like, oh, if it's not enshrined in this thing, then it's not worthy of being passed down, or it's not true. And I think part of it is right because we all, stem from like immigrant culture. It's however many generations back. It's like, okay, what do we have to hold on to? So if you have this one or two things that you think are the thing, then you're like, if I let go of this, then am I still Chinese or am I still whatever? But yeah, I was just thinking, I was like, well, I have an Instant Pot, so I was like, it's gonna become an Instant Pot meal probably at some point. And maybe that's how my daughter will remember it. Who knows?
Yeah. I think what you just named too is like the way that we, going back to, kind of food is love and food is honor, but honoring the people that taught us these things by cooking in their methodologies and feeling like if we stray from that, we're no longer honoring the person more than the recipe. Right. And I think, and maybe this is my own thing, but to some extent, if I were to do something in a different way, like make beef and peas in the Instant Pot in your case, right? Is that saying like, I know better than you, or I've figured it out better than you? And I don't know, it's sort of all of the things that are kind of like tied into what does it mean as the child to like find your own way and find a new way that is potentially better, and like gets into complicated things about child-parent relationships, I think, in like very subtle, nuanced, maybe subconscious ways.
I think for me, the dish still brings me like joy and comfort, but there's also a little bit of anxiety too, because I don't know if the girls would eat it this time or if they'll enjoy it. But, as I keep making stuff for them, I think I've learned to kind of like temper my expectations and just be like, if they're not super into it, maybe they will be next time, or maybe the reverse too. Maybe they'll be super into this time, and next time they'll just be like, oh, gross, why did you make this for me? And that's just fine. I think they're on their own kind of food journey as well. So, and they're like just super inconsistent, so try to not to take it personal.
And they might want the dish when they're like 30 years old, right? And to be like, oh,
yeah.
I miss this. And you're like, what are you talking about? So I don't know how the time is going, but do they have favorite stuff of yours right now, or they're still all over the place?
The only thing I can think of actually is dumplings that we don't make, that we get at a neighborhood bakery that have been named as like, this is my favorite meal. And then it's actually really random. So yesterday, like I made them quesadilla, like I made Sydney a quesadilla and Penny had a burrito. And it was, whatever, like beans from a can and cheese and avocado. And she didn't want the chicken that we had. Fine. And I was like, oh, she's maybe, I don't know how this is going to be received, but it's lunch. Great. And she was like, this burrito is so yummy. And I was like, okay. But the next time I ask her that, she'll be like, no, absolutely not. And like the time before, she's like, meh, whatever. So even in their like things that I love, it's very inconsistent. And I think it's largely just like temperament and what they've had a lot of, and what is novel, right? Like there's so much around kid eating that is novelty. And I think, to Sam's point from the beginning of like, this was his Friday night thing. And I think you got to eat it in front of the TV too, if I'm not mistaken, Sam.
Yeah, that's true. My dad was a stickler for like us turning off the TV and eating dinner at the dinner table and just being all together. But when he wasn't around and when I would be usually having this dish, it would be like way more lax. And just in front of the TV at the coffee table or something.
Right. So it's the novelty of how we eat food also that I think plays so much into the nostalgia and the memory. And I think that for our kids, to answer your question, Margot, like part of what they like and what they don't like sometimes is like when we let them eat it in front of the TV or when they just haven't had it for a while or it's coming off of like a fun day.
Actually, it's funny because in recent years, my dad has expressed, regrets. Your parents get really reflective about their parenting and whatnot. I think as we get older, they feel more comfortable like talking to you about it, I guess, as an adult. That he's like, oh, we should have had dinner together around the table as a family because we rarely did because they were so busy. Like they were always out and when we were younger. And so I think he really sees that as like, if we had just done that, then perhaps many things could have been different in terms of like maybe more positive outcomes for his kids in terms of like maybe would have had like more ambitious career goals or something like that. But so yeah, I don't know, maybe going back to your dad's point, I was like, oh, my dad would be like, good job, you ate around the dinner table. So important.
We could keep talking about this forever because what you also just named is what all of the hopes that your dad pinned on dinner or all of the regrets that he just pinned on dinner. Right.
Yeah,
like there's so much to unpack around food and eating food and food as familial comforts and, all of that, which is why this podcast exists.
As a person that did grow up eating dinner at the dinner table every night, it's maybe a little overrated sometimes. Like you can't pin all your hopes and dreams on that one, habit, I guess.
I feel much better about letting our kids watch TV sometimes then. Because I too did not grow up eating dinner at the dinner table. This has been great. I've had a lot of fun. We could literally talk about this for hours and hours. So we'll have to do that in subsequent episodes. You'll both have to think of new dishes, go to new dumpling restaurants. We could talk about that too. Anyway, Margot, tell people where they can find you on the interwebs and find your work.
You can find me on Twitter. It's at Margot Seeto. Meat as in like food, MEATO, last name Seeto, SEETO, or my public food account is Beyond Mito. Or you can visit my website, very messy website, at margotseeto.com. MargotSeeto.com.
And where can we find the dumpling report that Margot always works on and Sam sometimes works on?
Oh, yes. You can go to sfgate.com, sister website to the Chronicle.
Margot, thank you again for being here. Seriously, this was so much fun. I definitely want to eat this dish now, or more like have Sam make it for me. Thank you to our listeners. We hope you had half as much fun as we did. If you would like to try making this dish for yourself, whether in the microwave or on the stovetop, if you want to eat it in front of the TV or at a dining table, you can find the link to the recipe in the show notes or find us at worstqualitycrab.com and on Instagram at worstqualitycrab. Thanks. Goodbye.